The scraping sound echoed through the empty corridors as Ben Torres drew his knife across the whetstone. Each stroke was careful and measured, just like everything else he did. The blade caught the strange blue light that pulsed from the walls, creating dancing shadows in the cramped maintenance bay where he had made his temporary home. Ben had been living inside the alien ship for 3 weeks now, and he still couldn't get used to the way it hummed, not like a normal engine or power core, but something deeper. Something that reminded him of a sleeping animal's breathing. The other salvage crews had fled after the first week, claiming the ship was haunted or cursed or worse. Ben stayed because he needed the money, and because running away from weird noises had never solved any of his problems. The ship had appeared in human space without warning, drifting like a ghost through the outer colonies. Nobody knew where it came from or what had happened to its crew. The hull was made of some kind of crystalline material that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the angle. Government inspectors had declared it safe but worthless, so the salvage consortium put it up for bid. Ben had won the contract with the lowest offer. Everyone else wanted to strip the ship for parts and scrap metal. Ben just wanted to understand how it worked. He set down the knife and picked up another one from his collection. These weren't weapons, despite what they looked like. They were precision tools for cutting through metal, stripping wire, and prying apart stubborn components. A good mechanic's knives could make the difference between a clean repair and a dangerous mess. Ben had been collecting and maintaining them for 8 years, ever since he started working the salvage routes. The wall beside him pulsed brighter for a moment, then returned to its usual dim glow. Ben had noticed the ship did that sometimes, especially when he was working on something delicate, almost like it was watching him. He had tried to map the ship's systems, but every time he thought he understood the layout, new passages would appear while others sealed themselves shut. Most people would find that terrifying. Ben found it interesting. He tested the edge of the freshly sharpened blade against a piece of scrap metal. Perfect. The knife sliced through the material like it was paper, leaving a clean edge with no rough spots or tears. Ben nodded with satisfaction and moved on to the next knife in his collection. The ship's humming changed slightly, becoming deeper and more rhythmic. Ben paused in his sharpening to listen. After 3 weeks, he had started to recognize different patterns in the sound. This one was new, almost like the ship was trying to communicate something. He waited for a few minutes, but the humming returned to its normal pattern. Ben shrugged and went back to his work. He had learned not to worry too much about the ship's strange behaviors. As long as the life support kept working and the artificial gravity stayed stable, he could deal with mysterious sounds and shifting walls. The truth was, Ben had always been comfortable with things other people found unsettling. Broken machines, empty spaces, strange noises in the dark. His fellow salvagers thought he was crazy for working alone, but Ben preferred the quiet. No arguing about split profits, no competition over the best finds, and no one telling him he was doing things wrong. He picked up his third knife and examined the blade. This one needed more work than the others. The edge had been chipped during his last job, when he had been forced to cut through some particularly stubborn alien alloy. The metal had been harder than anything in his experience, but his knife had eventually won the battle. It always did, with enough patience and the right technique. As he worked, Ben found himself thinking about the ship's original crew. Who had they been? What had happened to them? The corridors showed no signs of battle damage or disaster. The ship just seemed to have been abandoned, left drifting through space until it wandered into human territory. The government investigators had found some kind of central chamber deep in the ship's core, but their equipment couldn't make sense of what they saw there. They had described it as a room full of crystalline formations and flowing lights, with walls that seemed to respond to their presence. After one inspector reported having vivid dreams about flying through space, the investigation was called off and the ship was declared safe for salvage operations. Ben had found the chamber during his second week aboard. Unlike the investigators, he hadn't been afraid of the lights and moving crystals. He had sat in the center of the room for hours, watching the patterns shift and change. The ship's humming had been strongest there, almost like a heartbeat. When he finally left, Ben could have sworn he heard something like a sigh echoing through the corridors. The fourth knife was in good condition, needing only minor touch-ups. Ben worked slowly and methodically, enjoying the simple rhythm of blade against stone. There was something peaceful about the process, something that helped him think clearly. His grandfather had taught him to sharpen knives when he was just a boy, explaining that taking care of your tools was the most important skill any worker could learn. A dull knife is dangerous, the old man had said. It slips and cuts where you don't want it to, but a sharp knife goes exactly where you point it every time. Ben had carried that lesson with him through years of salvage work. Whether he was dismantling a derelict space station or repairing a broken hyperspace drive, having the right tools in perfect condition made all the difference. Other salvagers might laugh at his collection of knives, but Ben had never met a job he couldn't handle with the proper blade and enough patience. The ship's humming grew louder again, and this time Ben definitely heard something different in the pattern. Almost like music, but with harmonies that hurt to think about too directly. He paused in his sharpening to listen more carefully. For just a moment, Ben could have sworn he heard something else mixed in with the humming. Something that sounded almost like voices, speaking in a language he didn't recognize but somehow almost understood. The voices seemed to be discussing something important, something that involved him directly. Then the moment passed, and the ship returned to its normal quiet humming. Ben shook his head and went back to sharpening his knives. 3 weeks of strange sounds and shifting walls had taught him not to trust everything he thought he heard. The human mind had a way of finding patterns and meanings in random noise, especially when someone was alone for long periods. But as he worked on his fifth and final knife, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was trying to tell him something important, something about his future and choices he would have to make soon. He finished sharpening the last blade and carefully arranged all 5 knives in his tool roll, sharp, clean, and ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Dreams of flying filled Ben's sleep for the 3rd night in a row. Not in a ship or shuttle, but actually flying through space under his own power. Stars rushed past him like silver ribbons while distant suns painted his path with colors that had no names. In the dreams, he could feel the cold of deep space and the warmth of stellar radiation on his skin at the same time, as if his body had become something more than just flesh and bone. When Ben woke up, his tools were arranged in perfect circles around his sleeping bag. Not scattered where he had left them, but organized in geometric patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. The 5 knives he had sharpened the night before sat in the center of the arrangement, their blades pointing toward the ship's core like compass needles seeking magnetic north. Ben sat up slowly, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He was absolutely certain he had put his tools away properly before going to sleep. 23 years of living alone had taught him to be neat and organized, especially in small spaces where clutter could become dangerous. But somehow, during the night, everything had been moved and rearranged according to some pattern he didn't understand. The ship's humming sounded different this morning. Instead of the usual steady rhythm, it pulsed and flowed like music played by an orchestra of instruments he had never heard before. The crystalline walls glowed brighter than usual, casting rainbow patterns across the maintenance bay where Ben had made his home. He stood up and walked to the nearest wall, placing his hand against the smooth surface. The material felt warm, under his palm, and he could feel a slight vibration running through it. Not the mechanical vibration of engines or power systems, but something more organic, something alive. As his hand touched the wall, Ben felt a sudden rush of images flash through his mind. Ancient cities floating in space, connected by bridges of pure light. Beings that looked almost human but moved with impossible grace. Their skin marked with patterns that shifted like living tattoos. Ships that flew through space without engines, guided by the will of their crews rather than technology. The images faded as quickly as they had come, leaving Ben standing with his hand pressed against the wall and his heart beating fast. For just a moment, he had seen the ship's memories, not his imagination or the result of too much time alone, but actual memories of a civilization that had existed long before humans ever dreamed of traveling between the stars. A sound from the corridor, outside made him turn away from the wall. Footsteps, moving with the heavy rhythm of magnetic boots on metal decking. Ben had been alone on the ship for weeks, but someone was coming toward his location. Multiple someones, based on the different patterns of footfalls. Ben quickly gathered his scattered tools, stuffing them into his work belt and tool bag. He had no idea who was approaching, but visitors to a salvage claim were rarely good news. Pirates, claim jumpers, or government inspectors looking for an excuse to seize valuable property. Ben had dealt with all three during his years in the salvage business. The footsteps stopped just outside the maintenance bay, followed by the sound of electronic equipment being activated. Scanners, probably, checking the area for signs of life or valuable technology. Ben pressed himself against the wall beside the entrance, hoping to stay hidden until he could figure out what was happening. A woman's voice echoed down the corridor, sharp and commanding. Biosigns confirmed. One human located in Section 7. No other life forms detected, but the ship's power systems are fully active. A deeper voice, probably male, responded with obvious impatience. Just one salvager? Our intelligence reports suggested this vessel was being stripped by a full crew. The others left weeks ago, the woman replied. This one either has more courage or less sense than the rest. Ben heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons being powered up. Whatever these people wanted, they weren't planning to ask nicely. He looked around the maintenance bay, searching for another way out, but the only exit was the corridor where the strangers were waiting. The ship's humming suddenly changed, becoming deeper and more urgent. The lights in the walls pulsed faster, and Ben felt the deck plates vibrate under his feet. For the first time since he had come aboard, the ship felt truly alive and aware of danger. 3 figures in military uniforms stepped into the maintenance bay. The leader was a woman with short gray hair and the insignia of a hegemony captain on her collar. Behind her came a tall man in security armor, his rifle already aimed at Ben's hiding spot. The third figure was something Ben had never seen before, covered in chitinous plates and standing on 4 legs instead of 2. Ben Torres, the captain said, reading from a tablet in her hand. Registered salvage operator working under contract for the consortium. You need to leave this ship immediately. This is a legal salvage claim, Ben replied, stepping out from behind the wall with his hands raised. I have all the proper permits and documentation. The captain smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Not anymore. The Hegemony Council has classified this vessel as a potential threat to galactic security. All civilian access is hereby terminated. Ben felt something cold and sharp settle in his stomach. The Hegemony was the alliance of 3 major species, formed to maintain order and prevent another galactic war. When they classified something as a security threat, it usually meant the object in question would disappear into a research facility and never be seen again. What makes you think this old ship is dangerous? Ben asked. It's been drifting in space for who knows how long. The hull is intact, but most of the internal systems are completely dead. The security officer spoke for the first time, his voice muffled by his helmet. Dead systems don't generate power readings like this. Whatever's running this ship, it's more advanced than anything in our databases. As if responding to his words, the ship's humming grew even louder. The walls around them began to glow more brightly, and Ben felt a strange, tingling sensation in his hands and arms. The 5 knives at his belt started to vibrate against their sheaths, resonating with some frequency that made his bones ache. The 4-legged alien spoke in a series of clicking sounds that Ben somehow understood. The ship is awakening. We should withdraw and call for reinforcements. Nonsense, the captain snapped. It's just a derelict responding to our presence. Torres, gather your belongings. You have 5 minutes before we escort you off this vessel. Ben felt something shift inside his mind, like a door opening that had been locked his entire life. Suddenly he could feel the ship around him, not just as a collection of corridors and rooms, but as a living thing with thoughts and emotions. The ship was afraid, but not of the hegemony soldiers. It was afraid of being alone again, of returning to the empty silence that had filled it for centuries. And somehow, impossibly, Ben realized that the ship had been waiting for him specifically, Not just any salvager or explorer, but him, Ben Torres, failed mechanic and small-time salvage operator. The ship had been calling to him since the moment he first set foot aboard, trying to establish some kind of connection that he was only now beginning to understand. The security officer took a step forward, his rifle trained on Ben's chest. Time's up, salvager. Move toward the exit slowly and keep your hands visible. Ben looked at the three hegemony representatives, then at the glowing walls surrounding them. He could feel the ship's consciousness pressing against his own, offering him something that he didn't fully comprehend but knew he needed. Power, knowledge, and purpose beyond anything he had ever imagined. For the first time in his life, Ben Torres stopped running away from something he didn't understand. Instead, he reached out and touched the nearest wall with both hands, opening his mind to whatever the ship wanted to share with him. The world exploded into light and sound as two ancient consciousnesses finally met and recognized each other across the vast distance of space and time. Pain shot through Ben's skull like lightning as the ship's memories flooded into his mind. Thousands of years of history compressed into seconds, showing him the rise and fall of an entire civilization. He saw the Ashanti Empire at its height, their bioships soaring between star systems like living creatures. He witnessed their final war against something dark and hungry that came from the space between galaxies, and he felt their desperate last stand as their homeworld burned. Through it all, one ship had survived. The vessel he now stood within, called Deep Current in the ancient tongue. It had been the flagship of Admiral Keown, the greatest warrior poet of the Ashanti fleet. When the empire fell, Deep Current had fled into the void, carrying the memories of its people and waiting for someone worthy to continue their legacy. The hegemony soldiers shouted in alarm as crystalline tendrils erupted from the walls, wrapping around Ben like protective arms. The ship's biomechanical systems responded to his touch, integrating with his nervous system and flooding his body with nanobiological enhancers. Ben felt his muscles strengthen and his reflexes sharpen as centuries of warrior training downloaded directly into his brain. But something was different about this bonding. The ship's previous captain had been a proud military commander, trained from birth for war and conquest. Ben was just a mechanic who preferred fixing things to breaking them. Instead of overwhelming his personality, the ship's ancient programming adapted to his nature, creating something entirely new. The security officer fired his rifle, sending a bolt of plasma energy toward Ben's chest. Without thinking, Ben drew one of his sharpened knives and deflected the shot, the blade somehow channeling the ship's defensive capabilities. The plasma burst scattered harmlessly against the crystalline walls, leaving only a faint scorch mark on the metal. Impossible, the captain breathed. No human can move that fast. Ben looked down at the knife in his hand and gasped. The simple steel blade had transformed, now glowing with the same blue light that pulsed through the ship's walls. He could feel the weapon's connection to Deep Current's power core, drawing energy through some mechanism he didn't understand but instinctively knew how to use. The four-legged alien backed toward the corridor, chittering rapidly in its native language. Bioship bonding confirmed. The human has been selected as the vessel's new captain. We must retreat immediately. Stand down, the captain ordered, but her voice shook with uncertainty. This is still a hegemony operation. Torres, release whatever control you've established over this ship's systems. Ben almost laughed at the suggestion. He wasn't controlling anything. If anything, he was being controlled, guided by the ship's ancient wisdom and tactical knowledge. But the guidance felt like cooperation rather than domination, as if Deep Current was sharing its capabilities rather than imposing them. The ship's corridors around them began to change, walls flowing like liquid metal to create new passages and seal off others. Ben could feel Deep Current's consciousness exploring his memories, learning about human technology and culture. In return, he gained access to knowledge that no human had ever possessed. The secrets of biomechanical engineering, faster-than-light travel without conventional drives, and weapons that could cut through the fabric of space itself. The security officer raised his rifle again, but the weapon simply stopped working. The ship's electromagnetic field had disrupted its power cells, leaving him holding an expensive piece of useless metal. All around them, the hegemony soldiers' equipment began to malfunction as deep current asserted control over the electromagnetic spectrum. "Your presence here is no longer welcome," Ben said, and was surprised to hear how his voice had changed. It carried harmonics now, resonating with the ship's bioacoustic systems. "Leave this vessel and tell your superiors that deep current has chosen its new guardian." The captain tried to maintain her composure, but Ben could see the fear in her eyes. "The Hegemony Council will not accept this. We'll return with a full battle fleet if necessary." "Then you'll return to face a bonded bioship," Ben replied. "I suggest you reconsider your priorities." As if to emphasize his point, the ship's hull around them became transparent, revealing the vast expanse of space outside. But instead of the empty void that should have surrounded them, the view showed dozens of weapons emplacements that had materialized along deep current's outer surface. The ship had been preparing for battle while Ben was being transformed, growing defenses that combined Ashanti biotechnology with innovations inspired by his mechanical knowledge. The alien soldier was the first to break, turning and running toward the corridor as fast as his four legs could carry him. The security officer followed a moment later, his useless rifle clattering to the deck. Only the captain remained, staring at Ben with a mixture of hatred and professional curiosity. "What are you now?" she asked quietly. Ben considered the question seriously. He could feel deep current's presence in his mind, offering him access to weapons that could level cities and knowledge that could reshape entire star systems. But underneath all that power, he was still the same person who had spent 3 weeks, alone on a derelict ship, sharpening knives and trying to understand how things worked. "I'm still a mechanic," he said finally. "I just have better tools now." The captain left without another word, her magnetic boots echoing down the corridor as she retreated to her shuttle. Ben watched her go, then turned his attention to the transformed knife in his hand. The blade had grown longer and sharper, its edge glowing with contained energy that could cut through almost anything. More importantly, he could feel 3 similar transformations happening to the other knives at his belt. Over the next several hours, Ben explored his new capabilities with the same methodical approach he had always used for mechanical problems. The ship responded to his thoughts and emotions, reshaping itself to match his needs and preferences. Where the original Ashanti design had been focused on warfare and conquest, Ben's influence pushed deep current toward more practical applications. The bioship grew new manufacturing capabilities, able to produce spare parts and replacement equipment for other vessels. Its weapon systems remained formidable, but Ben found himself more interested in their potential for precision work than mass destruction. His 5 transformed knives could now cut through energy shields and hull plating, but they could also perform delicate repairs on quantum processors and hyperspace drive components. Most remarkably, the ship's ancient databases began to merge with Ben's practical experience, creating new technologies that neither Ashanti nor human science had ever imagined. Biomechanical systems that could self-repair and adapt, energy sources that drew power from the quantum foam itself, and weapons that could disable rather than destroy. As the day progressed, Ben realized that his transformation was far from complete. The ship continued to modify his body and mind, enhancing his capabilities while preserving his essential humanity. He could feel his perception expanding, able to process information at superhuman speeds while maintaining the patient, methodical. Thinking that had made him a good mechanic, the real test came when deep current sensors detected approaching ships. The hegemony forces were returning, just as their captain had promised, but they had brought friends. 3 different fleets converged on the bioship's location, each representing a major galactic power with their own reasons for wanting to claim or destroy what Ben and deep current had become. For the first time since the bonding had begun, Ben felt a moment of doubt. He was still just one person, even with all the ship's enhancements. How could he possibly stand against entire battle fleets? Deep Current's answer came not in words, but in a flood of shared memories. The ship showed him its previous captain, Admiral Keone, facing impossible odds during the Ashanti Empire's last stand. 1 ship against 1,000, 1 warrior against an entire invading force. Keone had not won that battle, but he had fought it with honor and courage, buying time for others to escape. But Ben wasn't Kione, and this wasn't the same war. As the enemy fleets approached, he began to understand that his greatest strength wasn't his new weapons or enhanced abilities. It was his fundamental approach to problems, not as battles to be won, but as puzzles to be solved. The mechanic who had once sharpened knives to defend himself was about to discover what it meant to be chosen by a ship that had been waiting 3 centuries for someone who could show it a better way to fight. The enemy fleets hung in space like deadly stars, their hulls bristling with weapons designed to crack planets and boil atmospheres. Ben counted 47 ships in total, representing 3 different galactic powers that normally spent their time fighting each other. The fact that they had joined forces to face one bioship said everything about how seriously they took the threat he and Deep Current represented. Admiral Kane commanded the Hegemony Task Force from his flagship, the dreadnought Hammer of Justice. His tactical display showed the target vessel as a single red dot, surrounded by friendly green symbols. But Kane had learned not to trust simple mathematics when dealing with Ashanti technology. The bioships of the ancient empire had been legendary for their ability to defeat vastly superior numbers through speed, adaptability, and weapons that defied conventional physics. Ben felt Deep Current's anticipation as the ship prepared for battle, its biomechanical systems shifting and flowing to optimize their combat configuration. But instead of the aggressive posture that Admiral Kione would have adopted, Ben found himself thinking about the problem from a mechanic's perspective. These weren't enemies to be destroyed, but complex machines operated by living beings who probably had families and reasons for fighting beyond simple greed or ambition. The communication channel crackled to life, carrying Admiral Kane's voice across the void. Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Kane of the Hegemony Fleet. You are ordered to surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with overwhelming force. Ben activated Deep Current's communications array, feeling the ship's bioacoustic systems merge with his voice to create harmonics that carried across multiple frequency bands. Admiral Kane, this is Ben Torres. I have no quarrel with the Hegemony or any of your allies. All I want is to be left alone to continue my salvage work. Kane's response carried a note of dark amusement. Your salvage work has attracted the attention of 3 galactic powers, Mr. Torres. That ship you're bonded with represents technology that could shift the balance of power across known space. We cannot allow it to remain in civilian hands. Around the Hegemony vessels, 2 other fleets maneuvered into attack positions. The Syndicate crime families had sent their best raiders, sleek ships designed for fast strikes and quick escapes. The Chorus religious hierarchy contributed massive temple ships, their hulls covered in sacred symbols and housing weapons blessed by a dozen different faiths. Ben could feel Deep Current analyzing each enemy vessel, cataloging their weapons, defenses and crew complements with the precision of a targeting computer. But where the ship's ancient programming called for immediate attack, Ben found himself looking for alternatives. Every ship out there represented hundreds or thousands of living beings, most of whom were just following orders from leaders who feared what they didn't understand. The first shots came from the Syndicate raiders, plasma torpedoes streaking across space in brilliant arcs of destruction. Ben felt Deep Current respond instantly, the bioship's hull rippling and flowing to present different angles and surfaces to the incoming weapons. Instead of armor plating, the ship grew scales that absorbed and redirected energy. Scattering, the plasma bursts harmlessly into space. Admiral Kane's dreadnought opened fire a moment later, its main batteries hurling bolts of coherent energy that could vaporize a space station. Ben watched the attacks approach with a strange sense of calm, his enhanced perception slowing time enough to track individual energy packets as they crossed the distance between fleets. Deep Current moved like a living thing, flowing through space in patterns that followed no conventional physics. Where human ships relied on reaction drives and gravitational manipulation, the bioship drew its motive force from the quantum foam itself, treating space-time as a medium to be shaped, rather than an obstacle to be overcome. The enemy weapons passed through empty space where Deep Current had been milliseconds before, but Ben wasn't content to simply dodge forever. As the ship danced between attack vectors, His transformed knives began to glow with accumulated energy, drawing power from the bioship's exotic matter cores. Instead of striking back with overwhelming force, Ben did something that confused every tactical computer in the enemy fleets. He began to perform surgery on their ships, using deep currents weapons to make precise cuts through communication arrays and weapon systems. The bioship's energy beams carved through hull plating with surgical precision, disabling rather than destroying. A Syndicate raider found its engines severed from its power core, leaving the ship intact but helpless. A hegemony cruiser watched, its main batteries simply fall away from its hull, cut free by beams of energy so focused they left no thermal damage on surrounding systems. A Chorus Temple ship discovered that its sacred weapon arrays had been disconnected from their targeting systems, rendering them as harmless as decorative sculptures. Admiral Kane stared at his tactical display in disbelief. In 15 minutes of combat, the unknown bioship had disabled half his fleet without destroying a single vessel or killing a single crew member. The enemy was treating his battle fleet like a collection of broken machines that needed repair, not targets to be eliminated. "All ships concentrate fire on the target's power source," Kane ordered. "If we can overwhelm its defenses with simultaneous attacks, we might be able to breach its hull." Ben felt Deep Current's amusement at the strategy, but he also sensed the ship's growing bloodlust. The ancient biomechanical systems remembered battles where mercy was weakness, and enemies were destroyed without hesitation. For a moment, Ben felt the temptation to give in to that programming, to show these fleets what a truly awakened bioship could accomplish. Instead, he did something that Admiral Kyone had never attempted. He opened his mind fully to deep currents, consciousness, sharing not just his knowledge and skills but his values and beliefs. The ship experienced human compassion for the first time, feeling Ben's genuine desire to protect life rather than destroy it. The transformation that followed was unlike anything in Ashanti history. Deep Current's weapon systems evolved in real time, developing capabilities that had never existed before. Instead of energy beams designed to kill, the ship grew projectors that could emit targeted electromagnetic pulses, shutting down specific systems without harming their operators. The final phase of the battle lasted less than 5 minutes. Deep current flowed through the enemy formation like water through a sieve, its new weapons disabling ship after ship with surgical precision. By the time Ben was finished, 47 warships hung dead in space, their crews alive but their vessels completely powerless. Admiral Kane found himself staring at a communication screen that still worked, even though every other system on his ship had been carefully shut down. The face that looked back at him belonged to a young man with tired eyes and grease-stained coveralls, not the warrior god he had expected to find commanding an Ashanti bioship. "Your crews are safe," Ben said simply. "Your life support systems are still functional, and I've left your distress beacons active so rescue ships can find you. But your weapons are gone and your engines won't restart for at least 72 hours. "Why?" Kane asked, his voice hoarse with confusion. "You could have destroyed us all. Why show mercy to enemies who came here to kill you?" Ben was quiet, for a moment, feeling Deep Current's ancient consciousness processing the same question. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of 3 centuries of waiting and the wisdom of a civilization that had learned too late the cost of endless war. "Because I'm not your enemy, Admiral. I'm just a mechanic who wants to fix things instead of breaking them. Maybe it's time the galaxy learned the difference." As the disabled fleets drifted in space, waiting for rescue, news of the battle spread across the civilized worlds. For the first time in galactic history, a single ship had defeated a combined fleet without firing a shot in anger. The implications of that victory would echo through the halls of power for years to come, as leaders struggled to understand what it meant when the ultimate weapon chose mercy over destruction. But Ben Torres, bonded partner of the bioship Deep Current, was already thinking about his next problem. The battle had revealed his location to every power in the galaxy, and he suspected that even bigger challenges were coming. The ship's sensors were detecting something at the edge of known space, something vast and hungry that made even the Ashanti records tremble with fear. The mechanic who had once sharpened knives to defend himself was about to discover that some threats required more than surgical precision to overcome. The refugee convoy stretched across 50,000 kilometers of space, a ragged line of damaged ships carrying the survivors of 3 colony worlds. Ben Torres guided Deep Current through the formation with gentle precision, his bioships manufacturing systems working overtime to produce replacement parts and emergency supplies. What had once been the galaxy's most feared weapon had become its most unlikely humanitarian vessel. 6 months had passed since the battle that made Ben famous across civilized space. The victory over 3 combined fleets had established his reputation, but it was what he did afterward that truly changed the galaxy's perception of human Ashanti cooperation. Instead of using his power to conquer or rule, Ben had chosen to help. Deep Current had evolved far beyond its original military design. The ship's biomechanical systems now included manufacturing bays, medical facilities, and even agricultural pods that could produce food for entire populations. Ben's influence had transformed the ancient warship into something Admiral Keown could never have imagined, a vessel dedicated to preserving life rather than ending it. The latest refugees came from the Outer Rim, where a cascade failure in the Nexus system star had triggered massive solar flares. 3 colony worlds had been evacuated in a matter of hours, their populations crammed into cargo haulers and passenger ships never designed for long-distance travel. Many of the vessels were already breaking down when Deep Current arrived to escort them to safety. Ben moved through the refugee ship Mercy's Promise, his transformed tools allowing him to repair critical systems that should have required a full maintenance dock. The ship's fusion reactor had been jury-rigged with spare parts and prayer, but Ben's enhanced understanding of quantum mechanics let him stabilize the containment field with components that shouldn't have worked together. "I don't understand how you did that," admitted Captain Morris, the grizzled spacer who commanded the refugee vessel. "Those plasma conduits were completely burned out, and we didn't have the right replacement parts." Ben smiled as he packed away his tools, each knife now a precision instrument capable of working with materials at the atomic level. Sometimes fixing something isn't about having the right parts. It's about understanding how the pieces want to fit together. The explanation would have sounded mystical to his old self, but Ben had learned to think in ways that transcended pure mechanical knowledge. Deep Current's biomechanical nature had taught him to see machines as living systems, each component contributing to a greater whole that could adapt and evolve when properly understood. His comm unit chimed with an urgent signal from Deep Current. Ben excused himself from the refugee ship and transported back to his bioship, where the vessel's sensors had detected something troubling at the edge of the system. Long-range scans showed a massive swarm approaching from deep space, but these weren't ships built by any known civilization. The objects moved in organic patterns, flowing through space like a school of metallic fish. Each individual unit was roughly the size of a destroyer, but they seemed to be connected by some invisible network that allowed them to act as a single entity. Deep Current's ancient databases identified them immediately, and Ben felt the ship's consciousness recoil in recognition and fear. Devourers, the same force that had destroyed the Ashanti Empire and consumed dozens of other civilizations. Biomechanical constructs from outside the galaxy, driven by an insatiable hunger to absorb and process all organic matter they encountered. The swarm approaching the refugee convoy numbered in the thousands, more than enough to strip every ship clean and leave nothing but empty hulls drifting in space. Ben felt Deep Current's weapons systems activate automatically, the ship's ancient programming preparing for a battle that its previous captain had fought and lost 3 centuries ago. But as the targeting systems locked onto the lead Devourer units, Ben made a decision that would have horrified Admiral Keown. He shut down the weapons and opened a communication channel. The response came immediately, a chaotic flood of signals that crashed through Deep Current's communication arrays like digital screaming. But underneath the noise, Ben detected something unexpected. Not the mindless hunger he had expected from the historical records, but patterns that suggested intelligence. Damaged intelligence, corrupted and fragmented, but still recognizably the remnants of conscious thought. "Current," Ben said quietly, using the nickname he had given the ship. "Can you filter that signal? I think they're trying to communicate." Deep Current's bioacoustic systems worked to isolate meaningful patterns from the chaos, and slowly a message began to emerge. Not words in any conventional sense, but concepts transmitted directly from mind to mind. Images of a dying galaxy, consumed by something vast and dark. Desperate flight across impossible distances. The gradual corruption of refugees who had traveled too far and seen too much. The Devourers weren't invaders. They were survivors. The last remnants of a civilization that had fled their home galaxy ahead of something even worse. The biomechanical modifications that made them so effective at consuming organic matter had originally been life support systems, designed to help them survive the journey between galaxies. But the modifications had gone wrong, turning them into the very thing they had been fleeing from. They're in pain. Ben realized, his enhanced empathy allowing him to feel the anguish behind the Devourer's chaotic signals. All this time they've been trying to stop themselves, but they can't. The biomechanical systems have taken over. The lead Devourer units were already beginning their attack run on the refugee convoy, their consumption arrays glowing with deadly energy. Ben had perhaps minutes before they would begin processing the first ships, turning thousands of innocent people into raw material for their corrupted biology. Deep Current's weapons could destroy the entire swarm, but Ben found himself thinking about a different solution. The ship's manufacturing systems had evolved far beyond their original design, capable of producing complex biomechanical components that could interface with almost any technology. If the Devourers were trapped by their own modifications, perhaps those modifications could be repaired instead of destroyed. Ben opened his mind fully to Deep Current's consciousness, sharing his plan with the ancient bioship. For a moment he felt the vessel's confusion and resistance. This went against everything in its programming, every instinct developed over centuries of warfare. But gradually, Deep Current began to understand what its human partner was proposing. Instead of firing weapons, the bioship began producing specialized nanobiological constructs, microscopic machines designed to interface with Devourer technology. Ben launched these constructs in massive clouds, sending them toward the approaching swarm with the same precision he had once used to repair damaged ship systems. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Instead of energy beams and explosive warheads, Ben fought with healing nanites and corrective programming. As the microscopic machines reached the Devourer swarm, they began the delicate work of repairing 3 million years of accumulated damage to the aliens' biomechanical systems. The process was agonizing for both sides. Ben felt every moment of the Devourer's pain as their corrupted systems were slowly restored to their original function. Deep Current strained its manufacturing capabilities to the breaking point, producing ever more sophisticated repair constructs as the true extent of the damage became clear. But gradually, incredibly, the swarm began to change. The chaotic movements became more organized, more purposeful. The consumption arrays powered down as the aliens regained control over their own biology. Most remarkably, the signals coming from the swarm shifted from digital screaming to something that resembled actual language. The first successful communication came from a Devourer unit that had been completely restored, its consciousness finally free from the biomechanical corruption that had trapped it for eons. The being that spoke to Ben through Deep Current's translation systems called itself Harmony of Distant Stars, and its gratitude was overwhelming in its intensity. "You have given us back ourselves," Harmony said, its voice carrying harmonics that spoke of vast loneliness finally ended. "For 3 million years we have been prisoners in our own bodies, forced to consume what we once sought to protect. How can we repay such a gift?" Ben felt tears running down his face as he responded. "Tell me about the thing that destroyed your galaxy. Help us prepare for whatever's coming." The information that Harmony shared changed everything. The dark force that had consumed an entire galaxy was already spreading toward the Milky Way, a wave of entropy that turned stars into darkness and planets into empty void. It would arrive within a generation, bringing with it the end of everything Ben had ever known or cared about. But for the first time since the Ashanti Empire had fallen, there was hope. The restored Devourers carried knowledge of technologies that could resist the coming darkness, weapons and defenses that had been tested in the ultimate war. Combined with Deep Current's adaptive capabilities and Ben's innovative thinking, they might have a chance to succeed where entire civilizations had failed. As the refugee convoy continued toward safety, now escorted by both a bioship and a swarm of reformed devourers, Ben sat in Deep Current's heart chamber and methodically sharpened his knives. The simple ritual helped him think, just as it had during those first weeks aboard the ship when he was just a salvager, trying to make sense of alien technology. He understood now that he had never been sharpening those knives to defend himself. He had been preparing to become something the galaxy desperately needed, not another warrior to fight the darkness, but a healer who could turn enemies into allies and weapons into tools of salvation. The mechanic who had once worked alone in the empty corridors of a derelict ship had become the guardian of an entire galaxy. And for the first time since this journey began, Ben Torres was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.